Go ahead, Honorable Member.
Okay. Thanks, Deputy Speaker. The economic freedom fighters rise to move without notice that the House notes that this year marks the 33 years since the death or the passing away of the reggae hero Bob Marley. Bob Marley will be remembered for promoting marijuana for recreational use and also for medicinal use. Bob Marley also will be remembered for fighting for Africans in the diaspora and for Africans all over the world. The EFF notes that it will be important for the country at some stage to nationalize all natural resources, including marijuana. This will be important to make sure that the substance is actually turned into an economic activity, to make sure that things like fabric making and all sorts of other things that are important to grow our economy, because this indeed is an African herb.
Honorable members, if there are no objections, I put the motion. I put the motion. No objections. No objections, agreed to. Honorable member, I'm doing so because in South Africa, some things are illegal. So the rules will be checked whether we are within the appropriate ranks to do this. But otherwise, there was no objection, so it will be recorded as acceptable. Yeah.
There is no rational argument for continuing to deprive medical marijuana to people like me who need it. It is
Mario Ambrosini is a shadow of his former self, a mirror to millions of cancer sufferers across the world. After exploring treatment options overseas, Ambrosini is now taking bold steps in a bid to introduce unconventional therapy methods in South Africa. He's proposing government legalizes the use of medical marijuana in the treatment of not only cancer, but other long-term illnesses like epilepsy.
It's just the prohibition on the use of medical marijuana and other forms of uses of cannabis is so irrational, so un-South African, that almost cries to reason.
Ambrosini's proposal is being backed by some in both the medical and legal fraternities.
We know the symptomatic relief and the benefits from taking cannabis. Of course, anyone who smoked it knows the tranquility and the calmness that comes over them. But for people who are in pain, it has been proven now that it's a tremendous analgesic.
And in his reply to the State of the Nation address, President Jacob Zuma says Ambrosini's call is worth considering.
For medical, I was touched to see the man I've known and worked with for more than 20 years in this condition. I've asked the Minister of Health to look into this matter.
If the Medical Innovation Bill is passed, it'll be the first time an ordinary member of Parliament successfully advocates for new legislation. Leanne Jansen, Parliament.
Know more about your world. ENCA.com.
The chair now recognizes the gentleman from Oregon, Mr. Blumenauer, for 5 minutes.
Speaker, for more than 70 years, our government has followed the most spectacular failure in policy since the disastrous 13-year experiment with the prohibition of alcohol. 43 years ago, the National Commission on Marijuana and Drug Abuse released a report finding that the federal ban on marijuana is unjustified and inappropriate. Yet, for most of that time, federal policy has been frozen in amber. Countless lives have been ruined for the use of a substance that a majority of Americans now think should be legal. Untold billions of dollars have been spent on a failed effort at prohibition, and still 25 million adults use it every month. Despite a finding in federal law that marijuana is a Schedule I controlled substance with no therapeutic value, 213 million Americans live in 34 states and the District of Columbia where medical marijuana is recognized and legal in some form, and over 1 million people use it as medicine. In 1996, voters in California marked a significant change in course when they legalized medical marijuana with a vote of the people, and almost 36 states have followed. In the fall of 2012, voters in the state of Washington and Colorado approved adult use of marijuana. And it should be noted the sky didn't fall, big cracks didn't appear in the earth, and problems with marijuana didn't get worse. In some instances, they became more manageable. For the federal government, the tide continues to turn. Last session of Congress had 6 successful votes on the floor of the House to rationalize our foolish policies, including reining in federal enforcement and opening opportunities for legal industrial hemp cultivation. Last fall, voters in my state of Oregon, looking at the evidence and experience, like in Colorado, approved adult use by an even larger margin than previous state. The marijuana reform train has left the station. It's time for the federal government to redouble its efforts at developing policies that work. Congressman Jared Polis and I will reintroduce this week our legislation to establish a federal framework to end the failed federal prohibition. It will pave the way for states to chart their own course, to legalize, tax, and regulate marijuana according to what individual states want to do, just like they do with alcohol. We will save tens of billions of dollars in failed enforcement, incarceration, and lost revenues. We will choke off a profit center for drug cartels that have been enriched by our failed policies. And we will make it easier to enforce laws to keep marijuana out of the hands of our children and have money for government services rather than waste money on failed policy, arresting people for something that a majority of Americans now think should be legal. For those of us who've worked in this field for years, it's an exciting time. My legislation will deal with the taxation of marijuana, and we look forward to refining it to be able to have the tax at a proper level to support government services, but also reasonable enough to choke off black market supply. It's time for us to enter a new era of marijuana policy for research, protecting our children, for economic development, and individual liberties. I strongly urge my colleagues to examine the legislation that we've advanced and be part of this long overdue effort at reform.
The purpose of this two-day conference organized by the Department of Social Development and the Central Drug Authority was to start a national discussion on whether cannabis should be legalized for medicinal use. This meeting is the first of its kind in South Africa, and government is looking at the safety and dangers of the use of cannabis. This roundtable is meant to serve as a precursor for debates on the Medicinal Innovation Bill that will be discussed in Parliament.
Remember, this is a very, very sensitive matter that needs us to engage further on it, and then it will take some time before we ultimately arrive at the point where we are saying this is a South African position paper, because remember, this still has to be presented to the Minister of Social Development, still has to be presented to the Cabinet, and then be taken through all the parliamentary processes. It's a lengthy thing, it's not a 2 days issue.
It's been proven that cannabis has medicinal qualities and that several countries do use it to treat certain illnesses. But many doctors here are still skeptical about its benefits.
I think we need to do more research. We need to also agree on concentrations of the substance that has to be isolated. We need to also have a program for training doctors on prescribing it. We need to also alert pharmacists who have to store it and keep it.
Who wants a doctor to operate on them while he's high on cannabis, or a pilot to fly a plane while he's high on cannabis? And for this purpose, we do think that the drug should be studied, the molecules that are relevant identified, and then produced after clinical trials, and you've made sure that it's safe for the public.
The Medical Innovation Bill has supporters, and André Duplessis believes it would be the best thing that could happen to South Africa if the bill was passed.
This is very important for South Africa that this Cannabis Roundtable was held. All the viewpoints from the various involved and committed parties have been heard, and hopefully government will take them to heart, and what we'll get out of it is something that is representative of South Africa. In places that have legalized cannabis, they are making huge economic strides forward, and I think South Africa could join them.
This two-day conference ended on a positive note where all diverse stakeholders were heard. Now recommendations will have to be taken into account, and the country will have to decide if it will legalize or not cannabis for medicinal use. Julie Shire, S.A.C.C.R.A, Johannesburg.
This absurd continuation of this prohibition is largely a function of ignorance. In 1967, because I was so concerned about this drug marijuana, I decided to do a review of the literature. I was then persuaded by Harvard University Press to do a book. The book came out in 1971, Marijuana Reconsidered. I learned that what was being said about this drug was mythological. You couldn't find the data to really support it. It turns out that marijuana came across as a remarkably non-toxic drug. Cannabis is a plant. Now, in the plant, there are somewhat more than 60 molecules called cannabinoids. THC is the most active. THC stands for tetrahydrocannabinol. People find smoking marijuana very useful for a whole host of symptoms. And if you inhale it, you get the effect within a very short period of time. So you can titrate it. By titrate it, I mean you can take just enough to get rid of your symptoms and stop.
The government hates to admit that they've already acknowledged that marijuana is a medicine. They acknowledged it in the 1970s and 80s when they allowed dozens of Americans to receive a monthly supply of marijuana from the government's marijuana farm at the University of Mississippi. Some of those people are still alive and still obtaining it today, their monthly canister of marijuana.
Now, here's where I keep my cannabis. Keep it refrigerated, it stays fresher. I receive 1 tin of 300 pre-rolled cigarettes, approximately 300 cigarettes, every 25 days from the federal government. And here's hermetically sealed with wax to try to keep the freshness and the strength up. This marijuana was actually grown right here in April of 1996. So it's been packaged and frozen since then. And then you open it up. Okay, inside you'll see that there's approximately 300 rolled cigarettes to this tin and sold by a cigarette machine. What this can means to me is for the next 25 days, I don't have to worry about medicine. That I know that I'll be as well as I possibly can be, and that I don't have to worry about if somebody's going to bust my door down and come arrest me because of this medicine. The disorders that I suffer from are multiple congenital cartilaginous exostosis and a variant of the syndrome pseudo-hypoparathyroidism. In lay terms, what it means is bone tumors that grow outwardly from the long bones, such as this, grow outwardly into the muscles and the veins, stretching the muscles and the veins, making it very painful. But more important, any kind of movement can tear the muscle or tear the vein, and I could hemorrhage, and a clot could break off, go to my heart, my brain, my lungs, I'm dead. I usually try to get in, if I can, 10 to 12 marijuana cigarettes per day. What the cannabis definitely does is relax the muscles going over these tumors. Thereby, I can move and not have to worry about tearing anything. So I'm ready to go to work and I try to make some money for myself and my clients. More important, for my clients. know, when people see me taking my medicine, they don't understand that it's medicine, and they think all I'm trying to do is get high, and that I've got, you know, some kind of balls to be able to do it in public. Of course, I try to explain to them right away that it's medical use provided by the federal government. And I'm sure most people just kind of laugh and go, yeah, right. I became the second person in the United States to receive medical cannabis from the federal government. Robert Randall was the first patient.
We welcome to Larry King Live, Bob Randall, the first American ever to gain legal access to marijuana because of his glaucoma condition. Why are you allowed to use these, Robert?
I have a disease called glaucoma, and marijuana at this point is the only drug that will help prolong my sight.
You could smoke it now legally, couldn't you?
Sure.
Do it for me.
Okay.
Yes. This is a first. I want you to know, Larry.
I spent 27 years with Bob Randall, and 25 of those years he was using 10 marijuana cigarettes a day, federally supplied. And I can assure you he was not a stoner. He had a terrific memory. He was extremely articulate. He was highly motivated when it came to, particularly to this issue.
I think the only thing surprising here is that a small group of unelected bureaucrats have so long resisted making marijuana medically available. Essentially, it comes down to almost a theologic argument. They want to pretend that marijuana is simply evil, and I think we have to be more rational than that. We have to realize that marijuana has good and bad uses.
Bob was treated on every conventional medication that was available, and it was only through the addition of marijuana that his eye pressure was lowered to within the safe range. Told at 25 that he would be blind by the time he was 30, marijuana made the critical difference, and Bob could see up until the time of his death in 2001. We were arrested in August of 1975 for growing 4 marijuana plants on our sun deck in Washington, D.C. And once Robert found out that the federal government was already conducting research on marijuana as a possible glaucoma treatment, that made him very angry. He could not reconcile in his mind that we were being called criminals for what the federal government was already well aware of. So we went to trial in July of 1976, and the lawyers pleaded that Robert needed medical access to marijuana based on his medical need. The trial was held before Judge James Washington in Washington, D.C., and he found Robert not guilty of marijuana possession by reason of medical necessity. It established within the legal framework the concept of medical necessity. And by 1991, we had 13 individuals who were receiving marijuana legally for the purposes of medical application.
George Bush Sr., who was running for re-election, didn't want to look like he was soft on drugs, and so he decided to close down the program so nobody else could get on it. He grandfathered the 13 of us in so we didn't sue the government. It's ironic when you've got something legal that everyone else could be arrested for. That's what's so bad about this fight, is that people that are sick, that need the medicine, aren't getting it. They're being made criminals. They're having their life in turmoil, especially if they're arrested. And it's just not right.
Marijuana it elicits too many emotions in people. And probably if it were called something else, it would be a much better world. I used to say that if a scientist went into an Amazon rainforest and came out with this new plant that had never been discovered before, that he called cannabis, and gave it to other scientists and researched it, it would be hailed as a savior, because it has so many wondrous properties, and it would be nice if it didn't have all of the baggage that marijuana has, if it were just simply cannabis. That would be a better world, I think.
Good morning, Neighborhood Securities. Just a moment.
I'll be right back. I'm a stockbroker. I'm a professional person. I handle a lot of money on a daily basis. President Pope. I'm a good, productive member of society. I pay lots of taxes, and I'm able to do that because I use marijuana. Yeah, I'm calling about that option we talked about. Did the check come in from Whiting today? What I like about this is the diversification. Cannabis doesn't impair my ability to think, to act, to move, to do anything I need to do. If anything, I think it sharpens my decision making, especially at work, because now I'm not concentrating on my pain. Hold on one quick second. Rev Rosenfeld? Yeah. All right, I'll go ahead and take care of it. All right, bye-bye. I've got to be sharp, I've got to handle millions of dollars on a daily basis, and to do that, I need to smoke my cannabis.
I'm Donald Abrams, and I'm Chief of Hematology Oncology at San Francisco General Hospital and a Professor of Medicine at the University of California, San Francisco. I do research in medical cannabis applications. I mean, if cannabis were discovered in an Amazon rainforest today, people would be clamoring to make as much use of as they could of all of the potential benefits of the plant. I think, unfortunately, it carries with it, you know, a long, maybe not so long history of being a persecuted plant.
My name is Dr. William Courtney. I'm involved in the raw use of cannabis as a dietary essential. In that capacity, you can use 60 times more than you can tolerate if heated, and in that capacity is a very potent anti-inflammatory that will find a very broad population of interest in this country. I was such a skeptic, and now it's real clear to me that cannabis, it's a vegetable. It's not psychoactive until humans alter it chemically. No other animal alters it. So the whole psychoactive thing is a human aspect of the plant that has nothing to do with the 34 million years of evolution that the plant has. It's captured these molecules that help our body's regulatory system be more effective. And its bottom line is it's a dietary essential that helps all 210 cell types function more effectively. And so I never even refer to it as medicine anymore. Strictly as a dietary essential. It only becomes medicine once you have a breakdown and a condition has become very serious and the system, your body is being overwhelmed. Then cannabis can be manipulated, i.e. heated, concentrated, to become a medicine. But in its best form, it's a preventative. And preventing diabetes is a lot better than trying to treat it. Preventing cancer is a lot better than trying to treat it. eating the plant raw, I mean, you not only need CBD. CBD is a non-psychoactive, whether it's CBD acid, which is how it's found in the raw plant, or CBD, which is what happens after you cook it or heat it or steep it or turn it into tea or something. But THC acid is the real tricky molecule in the raw plant, totally non-psychoactive, phenomenally beneficial as a molecule. Once it's heated, it turns into THC, and then the tolerable dose drops from hundreds of milligrams a day to 10. And with 10 milligrams, you stimulate the CB1 receptor, you get that psychoactive effect, either dysphoria or euphoria, but you walk away from 99% of the benefits of this plant, which are bone remodeling, intestinal function, neural function, inflammation control, cancer, precancerous detection. This plant can do phenomenal things, but not if you're taking 10 milligrams rather than the 600 milligrams that the FDA is currently approving as an investigative new drug. And what many of my patients do is they plant a plant every day and they pick a plant every day. If you let the plant grow to a certain size, you may be able to use half a plant a day, so a plant therefore would last for 2 days, so therefore you need one plant every other day. So the total number of plants depends on whether you have a plant a day, a plant every other, or a plant every 3 days, depending on the space available. But most of them are trying to do this whole thing on a single 400-watt light, and they use a fluorescent light to keep a mother alive, and they produce a clone, they start a plant. They pick the whole plant, strip the leaf and flower, juice that. Good indication that the roots are also useful. Stalk is a little fibrous, can bind up a lot of juicers and ruin the juicer because it's just so strong. So I generally strip the stalk and throw that away because it's just too fibrous. But juice that, it produces a small amount of juice, very concentrated, quite acidic. That has to be diluted. You can dilute it with fresh vegetable juice, fruit juice, or something that you buy off the shelf. My #1 project is to get the Convention 1 treaty, which is a UN committee that produced this treaty that I think there's 104 countries that have signed on to it, which says if you have, grow, possess, transport cannabis, you should be imprisoned. That is the document that every country in this world pounds people into the ground, cuts their heads off, and imprisons them. And so you take this information that unheated, it's not psychoactive, it's a vegetable that improves the function of your immune system and bone metabolism and musculoskeletal. Once the world knows that it's a vegetable, that's all it is. The most important vegetable on the planet. Then these various things that are in place that prohibit people from having access will change. And let's go ahead and reschedule this because clearly we can't have a patent on its utility and say it has no utility. I mean, the conflict is just, it's patently absurd.
Please welcome Dr. Cristina Sanchez, the molecular biologist who discovered the anti-cancer properties of THC.
My name is Cristina Sanchez, and I work at Complutense University in Madrid, Spain. And I have been working for the last decade on the anti-tumor effects of cannabinoids. In the early 1960s, Rafi Mishulam from the Hebrew University in Israel characterized the main compound in marijuana producing the psychoactive effects that we all know. The cannabis plant has been known for millennia. After the discovery of this compound that is called THC, it was pretty obvious that this compound had to be acting on the cells, on our organism, through a mechanism, through a molecular mechanism. And in the 1980s, 2 specific targets for THC were discovered, something that we call cannabinoid receptors. And after the discovery of the receptor, it was obvious that our body has to synthesize something that binds to these receptors. It was pretty obvious that it was something endogenously produced by our own bodies that was acting through these receptors. And these compounds, these endogenously produced cannabinoids, were found a few years later, and it's what we call the endocannabinoids, because they are produced endogenously inside our bodies. These compounds, the endocannabinoids, together with the receptors and the enzymes that synthesize, that produce the endocannabinoids and that degrade the endocannabinoids, are what we call the endocannabinoid system. And we now know that the endocannabinoid system regulates a lot of biological function. appetite, food intake, motor behavior, reproduction, and many, many other functions. And that's why the plant has such a wide therapeutic potential. We started working in this project 15 years ago, and it was basically by chance. We were working with astrocytes at that time, and we decided to change the model and work with astrocytoma cells, the tumoral cells. And we observed that when we treated these cells with cannabinoids, THC, the main psychoactive component of cannabis, it was killing the cells in our petri dishes. We were killing the cells. So we thought that we were facing some potential anti-tumoral responses. And then we decided to analyze these compounds in animal models of breast and brain tumors. The results we have obtained are telling us that cannabinoids may be useful for the treatment of breast cancer. We started to do experiments in animal models of glioblastoma, brain tumors, and we observed that cannabinoids were very potent in reducing tumor growth. Cells can die in different ways, and after cannabinoid treatment, they were dying in the clean way. They were committing suicide, which is something you really want when you have an anti-tumoral drug. One of the advantages of cannabinoids or cannabinoid-based medicines would be that they target specifically tumor cells. They do not have any toxic effect on normal, non-tumoral cells. And this is an advantage with respect of standard chemotherapy that target basically everything. When we started to see these anti-tumor and cell-killing effects on cancer cells, we decided to set aside our metabolic studies and to focus on cancer. I cannot understand why in the States cannabis is under Schedule 1, because it is pretty obvious, not only from our work, but from work from many other researchers, that the plant has a very wide therapeutic potential. We are in contact with doctors in Spain, oncologists, neuro-oncologists, and breast specialists that are willing to test these compounds in human patients. The plant, besides THC, produces cannabidiol. And this compound is very special because it is not psychoactive. It has been demonstrated that it's a very, very potent antioxidant. It protects the brain from stress and from damage, kills cancer cells, and when you combine it with THC, it produces synergistic effects, which means that the effect of THC is potentiated. At this point, we have enough preclinical evidence supporting the idea that cannabinoids may have anti-tumoral properties. We, as researchers, should explore in more depth and be willing to try in many different pathologies. Cannabis has an enormous therapeutic potential.
Despite the global and enduring popularity of cannabis, modern science is only just beginning to comprehend its effects. Here, just outside Washington, D.C., scientists are trying, for the first time, to find the density and location of the cannabinoid receptors in the human brain. Conducting the research is Dr. Garth Terry. What stage are you at? What's happening?
We have our volunteer this morning. He's being put into the scanner. So first, though, we have to make sure his head's in the right position. So he has this white mask on his face.
What are you injecting him with?
We're injecting him with a radioactive drug. It works like a dye, and it targets only the cannabinoid receptors throughout the entire body. Right. And we're imaging the cannabinoid receptors in the brain. So this drug will accumulate in the brain, and we'll get a picture of where those cannabinoid receptors are and how dense they are throughout the entire brain.
By mapping out where cannabinoid receptors exist in the brain and in what density, it should help shed light on the role of the cannabinoid system, which scientists are only just beginning to understand. What would you say the function is of these endocannabinoid chemicals?
Well, they act like a dimmer switch for other neurotransmitters. So other neurotransmitters like dopamine, when they're released in large quantities, you need to have a way to turn down that signal, that sort of turn down the amount of neurotransmitter release.
Why do these other chemical messengers need regulating?
Yeah, that's a good question. Well, if you have too much of a signal, it can actually be toxic to some brain cells. And so imagine the case in epilepsy. You know, a lot of message is getting across and it's not being regulated. It's all garbled, it's being sent all at once in full force.
In cases such as epilepsy, too much of a neurotransmitter is released, flooding through the brain and activating too many nerve cells. But when the cannabinoid receptors are activated, they cause the nerve cells to reduce the amount of neurotransmitter they release. In this way, the cannabinoid system keeps the brain stable, with levels of neurotransmitters at a happy medium. After 5 hours, the scan is complete. So Garth, you've got the results in?
Yes, so we finished our 5-hour scan, and let me show you what we have. So this is an image from our subject from today.
The receptors are highlighted in what color?
In bright red. Well, any color that you see, there are receptors. And red is the really dense areas. And you can see there's a lot of red and yellow. Green and blue are the really not dense areas where there are not many receptors in our brain.
So they really are everywhere?
Yes, yes. Yeah. In fact, they're the densest receptors, one of the densest receptors in the brain, most populated throughout the entire brain.
And are they only in the brain, or are they in other parts of the body?
Well, I can show you an image of a whole body scan that we've done here. Here's one. So you can see, yeah, you can see it goes right into the brain. Look how hot that is.
Wow.
Right in the brain. But there's also cannabinoid receptors in the liver. Also, look at the bone marrow, the vertebral column, the ribs.
So how do you think what we're seeing here in this image, how does that relate to the experience of using cannabis?
Well, look at the amount of cannabinoid receptors in the brain. A lot of them. A lot of the effects of cannabis use are in the brain. Euphoria, as an anxiolytic, it dissolves your anxiety, or it can even cause your anxiety. So cannabis abusers or cannabis users talk about having this high, the euphoria, that's probably from some of the deep structures in the brain.
Garth's research shows that the cannabinoid system protects the brain by regulating the other neurotransmitters within it. And the fact that it's so widespread is reflected in the range of sensations it brings.
Certain chemicals contained inside of the cannabis plant, called cannabinoids, might be the most powerful non-inhaled edible nutrients mankind will ever know. They may do for medicine what germ theory and antibiotics did, ushering in the next great advancement in human health and life expectancy. Cannabis was used as medicine for thousands of years and was even part of the U.S. pharmacopoeia from 1850 to 1942, at which point it was removed against the medical establishment's will and made illegal for all purposes based on racist fears and claims that its recreational use caused insanity and turned people into violent murderers and rapists. Today, cannabis is filed as a Schedule I drug under the Controlled Substances Act, a category under which it is legally defined as having absolutely zero accepted medical use. This being true despite the fact that 18 states and Washington, D.C. now recognize cannabis as a medicine. The public has known about the incredible medicinal qualities of cannabis for decades now and has fought to allow it nationally as a medicine, but the United States federal government has been extremely firm in its position, fighting lawsuit after lawsuit to keep cannabis in its highly restrictive category. The thing is, the Fed's official position on the matter explicitly describes smoking as the method of delivery to the body, which they claim to have zero medical value. Generally speaking, burning a substance, destroying most of it, and inhaling the smoke that's created isn't usually the most effective way to deliver nutrients to the body. Throughout time, the Feds have never publicly acknowledged the possibility of eating cannabis cannabinoids as medicine. What's interesting about the stubborn stance of our leaders that cannabis has zero medical value is that they actually hold a U.S. patent on the use of cannabis cannabinoids for the treatment and prevention of ischemic, age-related, inflammatory, and autoimmune diseases. The Feds have known about the disease-fighting potential of cannabis since at least 1974, when they discovered the cannabinoids inside of it to have cancer-fighting properties in mice. The National Cancer Institute, a federal agency, tested 4 common cannabis cannabinoids on mice with lung cancer and on lung cancer cells in test tubes. The cannabinoids were administered orally and ingested by the mice. 3 out of the 4 cannabinoids reduced the size of some tumors and slowed the progression of others, leading to a longer survival time than the untreated mice. The test tube cancer cells were also impaired by the cannabinoids. At that time, science had no explanation for why cannabinoids could show to be anti-cancerous. The pieces started to come together in 1988 when the first endogenous cannabinoid receptor, or endocannabinoid receptor, was found in the brain of a rat. Soon after, it was discovered that endocannabinoid receptors are replete throughout the mammalian body. They are in every bodily system: the brain, blood cells, internal organs, skin, and bones. These receptors are not unique only to mammals. Every living thing that has a backbone and a central nervous system has endocannabinoid receptors. In mammals, these receptors have been found to play a key role in many bodily functions. 2 distinct types of cannabinoid receptors have been identified, and a third type is suspected to exist. The 2 distinct types of receptors help control different parts of the body in different ways. The endocannabinoid receptors are in charge of turning up activity in certain parts of the body and turning it down in others, acting as regulators to keep bodily functions in check. Then in 1992, it was discovered that the body actually makes its own form of cannabinoids, called endocannabinoids, to feed the receptors and allow them to do their important oversight job. Eating foods with omega-3 fatty acids helps the production of endocannabinoids, which are then created on demand by the body to feed any receptor that needs stimulation. The endocannabinoid 2-AG is in mother's milk. Since discovering that endocannabinoid receptors impact upon so many bodily functions, scientists have been determined to experiment with the chemicals that affect them and explore their potential medical use. While there have only been 5 distinct types of cannabinoids identified to be made inside of the body, there have been 85 unique cannabinoids identified so far in cannabis. There are cannabinoids in some other plants, like echinacea, but nowhere near the quantity or potential medical quality of cannabis. But because the 85 cannabis cannabinoids are illegal to prescribe and prohibitively difficult to research for medical use in America, researchers have instead been forced to create artificial cannabis mocking drugs to attempt to stimulate the endocannabinoid receptors and manipulate their actions in a helpful way. The technical definition of a cannabinoid is any chemical that is capable of binding to and activating an endocannabinoid receptor. Cannabinoids made inside the body are endocannabinoids. Cannabinoids found in plants are phytocannabinoids, and the rest are made by scientists in a laboratory. These man-made cannabinoids don't suffer the same automatic illegal status as their natural counterparts. Synthetic cannabinoids that gain FDA approval are allowed to be marketed and sold on the highly expensive pharmaceutical market. Today, there are 2 such artificial cannabinoids that can legally be prescribed to Americans. In 1985, the drug Marinol was approved by the FDA and entered the market. It is prescribed to reduce nausea and vomiting in chemotherapy patients and increase appetite in AIDS and chemo patients. Also in 1985, the drug S.A.C.C.R.A was approved by the FDA, but it was not allowed to enter the market until 2006. It is prescribed to reduce nausea, vomiting, and neuropathic pain in chemo patients and increase appetite in AIDS patients. Both Marinol and S.A.C.C.R.A are modeled after the cannabis cannabinoid THC. The only other pharmaceutical cannabinoid drug in the world is the low-concentration oral spray Sativex. It entered the market in 2003 as a treatment for multiple sclerosis patients to alleviate their spasticity and neuropathic pain. Because Sativex contains the real cannabis cannabinoids THC and CBD, it is illegal in America, but available in other countries like Canada, England, Spain, and New Zealand. Although Marinol and S.A.C.C.R.A are the extent to which an American can legally use cannabinoids, the research shows that endocannabinoid receptors could be used to do more than just fight symptoms. A search on PubMed.gov for the word cannabinoid yields 15,243 results. These studies, most of which involve non-smoked cannabinoids, show that endocannabinoid receptors could be utilized to have a uniquely profound impact on what is currently known as health. This is nowhere near a complete list, but here are 25 studies showing different diseases and conditions that could be treated or even healed by exploiting the endocannabinoid system. Breast cancer, artificial cannabinoids reduce the size and spreading of tumors. Prostate cancer, an artificial cannabinoid reduced tumor growth. Lung cancer, artificial cannabinoids stopped the growth and spreading of tumors. Pancreas cancer, an artificial cannabinoid inhibited tumor growth. Liver cancer, THC and an artificial cannabinoid impaired cancer cells. Cervical cancer, an artificial cannabinoid killed cancer cells. Colon cancer, an artificial cannabinoid reduced cell growth and killed cancer cells. Non-Hodgkin lymphoma, an artificial cannabinoid reduced tumor size. Leukemia, THC reduced tumor size and killed tumor cells. Skin cancer, artificial cannabinoids reduced the growth of tumors. Cirrhosis, an artificial cannabinoid reduced fibrosis. Hepatitis, THC inhibited hepatitis. Alzheimer's, an artificial cannabinoid protected neurons and reduced cognitive impairment. Parkinson's, THCV could slow progression of PD. Multiple sclerosis, an artificial cannabinoid reduced neurological disability and progression of disease. Arthritis, artificial cannabinoids protected cartilage from degradation. Cardiac arrhythmia, anandamide and an artificial cannabinoid prevented arrhythmias. Insomnia, an endocannabinoid increased sleep. Sleep apnea, cannabinoids suppressed sleep-related apnea. Inflammatory bowel disease, artificial cannabinoids reduced inflammation. Depression, endocannabinoids may treat depression and anxiety. Post-traumatic stress disorder, an artificial cannabinoid could help control nightmares. HIV, cannabinoids inhibited TAT. Osteoporosis, an artificial cannabinoid increased bone mass and protected against bone loss. Nicotine addiction, an artificial cannabinoid could help smokers quit smoking. The bulk of trials that do move on to humans are those that show potential to control symptoms. For some reason, almost no experiments that show potential to actually cure disease move on to humans. Interestingly enough, in all of history, there hasn't been one study done testing the curative effect of ingested cannabis cannabinoids on humans. The only study on humans testing the disease-fighting properties of non-smoked cannabis cannabinoids took place in Spain in 2006. They took the lone cannabis chemical THC and directly injected it into malignant brain tumors of patients. As suspected, it had a cancer-fighting reaction in some of the patients' tumors, and those patients lived much longer than expected. But since then, no more clinical trials of this nature have been performed on humans. Despite the mountains of research showing the disease-fighting potential of cannabinoids, both artificial cannabinoids available to sick Americans are modeled after the same cannabis chemical, and all they do is alleviate a few symptoms. In 2007, using a new method to target the endocannabinoid receptors, the French pharmaceutical company Sanofi-Aventis came close to bringing America its next cannabinoid drug. They theorized that because CB1 receptors stimulate appetite, shutting those receptors down could help reduce appetite and help people lose weight. They didn't know exactly which CB1 receptors controlled appetite, so they made a drug that simply blocked as many CB1 receptors as possible. Their drug, called Acomplia, made it all the way to an FDA Phase 3 trial. Patients were indeed showing signs of reduced appetite. The drug also showed potential uses for nicotine addiction and metabolic disorders, but the FDA stopped the trial when some patients formed extreme anxiety and depression and attempted suicide. Patients with a history of depression weren't allowed in the study. Although Acomplia was not approved in the US, it was approved in Europe, and it was available in 56 countries by 2008. It quickly became clear, however, that its negative effects outweighed its positives, and it was pulled from the market by the end of the year. Other pharmaceutical companies like Merck and Pfizer were in pre-production stages with their own versions of weight loss CB1 blockers, but these programs were not fully carried out because of the failure of Acomplia. What Acomplia did is show clearly that if at least certain CB1 receptors do not receive endocannabinoids, then the body cannot function normally. Plain and simple, cannabinoid receptors are a part of the body and they need to be fed. In today's world, due to one or a combination of certain factors such as age, weight, diet, lack of diet, free radicals, and environmental toxins, for some people there could be a problem somewhere in the line of producing, transporting, and receiving all of the endocannabinoids needed to keep their receptors happy, thus directly impacting proper function in specific parts of the body. Over time, this could lead to a condition in the body similar to avitaminosis. Avitaminosis is any disease caused by a chronic or long-term vitamin deficiency. It's already known that suffocating certain CB1 receptors for a short time increases the chances of depression. Considering the multitude of bodily functions the CB1 and CB2 receptors control as a whole, who knows how many other conditions could be caused by a lack of nourishment in the receptors? Vitamins were only discovered because they realized that when people ate certain plants, they didn't get certain diseases. The cure for the diseases was as simple as eating those plants with nutrients that nature intended for the body, and as long as they ate those nutrients regularly, then the diseases wouldn't ever develop. The chemicals in cannabis, meaning both hemp and marijuana, when they are fresh, raw, and unheated, are not psychoactive. They can't get you high. That means as long as you eat or juice it in its natural state, cannabis is just another vegetable. Most modern pharmaceutical drugs focus only on a small, concentrated part of the body and work to shut it down. It's possible that when ingested properly, at least one of the 85 natural cannabis cannabinoids could safely fill the role of the endocannabinoids around the entire body, tapping into a natural built-in system to help restore normal order to areas of the body that need it in a way that has never been intentionally utilized in all of known human history. But because it's never been officially tested, we don't know. There are a lot of people out there who are claiming that ingested cannabis cannabinoids have cured their illnesses, but their accounts are only anecdotal. Whether ingesting cannabis cannabinoids fights deficiency in the body, provides an incredible boost to health, or does nothing at all, we deserve to know. If you care about the millions of sick, the injustice, the out-of-control costs of healthcare, and the unfunded Medicare and Medicaid programs, then please sign my petition and share this video. The only way the government will do anything is if enough people speak out. The world can't afford to ignore cannabis any longer.